Welcome to the Wealth Acceleration Podcast with your host, wealth coach Wade Reed.
What is up, everyone? It's Wade Reed again here for another episode of the Wealth Acceleration Podcast. Thank you for being here. Today, we're going to talk about when do I need to hire a CPA? Like literally, how do I know when it's time to do that? And do I, in fact, need a CPA, or is there someone else I might use instead who can do an even better job than a CPA might? Okay, let's figure this out together because it's really important. Remember, taxation is involved in everything that we do financially. We're taxed on earnings, whether that's income from our job or our business. We're taxed on earnings from our capital gains on investments when we sell them. We're taxed on stuff that we give away sometimes. We're taxed on the property that we live in. We're taxed on stuff that we sell, stuff that we buy. Like it's everywhere. Tax is absolutely everywhere. Stuff we can control is things like income tax and the taxes on capital gains. Make sure that we're holding our assets long enough that they get capital gain treatment versus regular tax or ordinary income tax. So because of the nature of taxation and it's involved in everything, it's really a good idea that we get familiar with and become pretty well versed in how to manage our taxes. I think it's our biggest expense ever in our entire lives. Taxation will be your biggest nemesis, so we've got to be efficient with it. So above my right-hand shoulder, I've mentioned this book before, Tax-Free Wealth. Again, if you're watching the video version of this, you'll see that. Robert Kiyosaki, one of my favorite authors, I think his book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is among the most published, most well-read from a personal finance standpoint. And what I think most people get out of it is the mindset behind money. Those who think like the rich and wealthy versus those who think in a more poverty mindset, scarcity versus abundance. One of my friends and mentors, someone I worked with for quite a few years, Garrett, Gunderson, wrote a book, Killing Sacred Cows, which is about the myths of money. And in the very beginning of that book, sets the mindset of abundance versus scarcity and how easy it is to get sucked into the scarcity side of things. And tax, among all the other topics I deal with my clients, I think brings the biggest amount of scarcity, fear, worry, concern. In fact, people sometimes are worried about going to jail. Yikes. Well, while that's highly unlikely, it is possible. You know, if you really evade taxes for many, many years and never file and try to be a sovereign citizen, and you may be forced into jail. Like that is a possibility, but it's not likely. It's not even in the realm of possibilities for most of us. All right, so let's dig into this. Like, why does tax matter in terms of preparation, CPA tax strategy? That's probably the key word right there is, do I have a tax strategy? That's very different than do I have my taxes prepared properly? There's like the by the book, I's dotted, T's crossed, I have my tax return prepared properly so that I can file it. But then there's the strategy behind how do I prepare my tax return? How do I take advantage of the deductions that are allowed to me legally and ethically? The tax law itself is a rule book that says every amount of income that you receive is taxable, except for, and then it has all these exceptions to the rule. And if you own a business, there's a lot of deductions. If you own a piece of real estate, there's a deduction. If you have a family, there's a deduction, even a credit that you can get toward your taxes. Certain things like buying an electric car, you might get a $7,500 tax credit at the time of this recording. If you buy a used car under a certain limit that's electric, you might get a $4,000 federal tax credit. Now, I'm going to distinguish this really quick. Perhaps we'll go more into this in a future podcast, but deductions are less powerful than credits. Deductions are a percentage savings. In essence, it's a discount on your taxes. Credits are a dollar for dollar savings on your taxes. So when you get a discount by taking a deduction, you're getting whatever your highest marginal tax bracket is, that percent deduction or reduction of taxes. So if you have $100 and you save 24 cents, now you only have to pay, what's the math? 76 cents, right? I got to do that in my head. I do math all day long and I still mess it up sometimes. So if you're like a W-2 employee and your asset base is really small, let's say you're kind of a newbie student, you're in college or just out of college, there's probably not much reason to hire somebody to help you with your taxes. You can probably do that on your own on what's called the 1040EZ, as in it's easy. You have very little to do on your tax return. You can file it online for free using free tax preparation software that you can find in multiple places. It walks you through everything. I used to do that when I was very early on in my graduate days, completing my education and just starting a family, starting into my business life. As things got a little more sophisticated, as I owned a home, as I started a business, those things became a little more complex and there's more deductions available to me. So I decided to hire somebody to help me out. And the question was, do I need a CPA or is there someone else that could help me? And I learned something very, very important. CPAs aren't tax strategists. Somehow we've come to believe that CPAs are the best people for tax help, but not necessarily, because the CPA designation stands for Certified Public Accountant. And an accountant is not trained as a tax strategist. An accountant is trained to understand all of the principles of how to account for transactions for businesses and how to audit to make sure that everything is accurate and correct, so that as the requirements that need to be followed in terms of like financial documents that get created, and a public company such as Tesla or Amazon, these are publicly traded companies, so they have to follow publicly Securities and Exchange Commission requirements to report what's called a 10Q. They do quarterly reports on their income and expenses, and they show the balance sheet of what assets they have versus what liabilities they have and how things are changing over time. So these are known as generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP standards. And certified public accountants are well versed in that stuff. They're not necessarily well versed in tax strategy, although a lot of tax preparers become CPAs, so that it kind of places this amount of credibility in your mind that they're particularly skilled or they're special at something. Well, they're special at something, it's just not necessarily tax strategy. Now, I'm not discounting the fact that a CPA could do tax preparation, that they do a good job, but what I am saying is most accountants are not really in the space of helping you get the maximum deductions, because they're mostly just trying to get your accounting right so that you can file your tax returns correctly. You have to be the one who's proactive in order to get tax strategy to happen. You have to ask better questions. You have to ask things like, I've learned about this deduction recently. How can I versus can I? The word how will invoke an analytical moment in the brain of the CPA or tax preparer, and they'll go, oh, let me think about that. Well, what about this, that, and the other? And they may come up with a way for you to legitimately take advantage of that deduction. So again, this book Above My Shoulder, Tax-Free Wealth by Tom Wheelwright, opens your mind. It's really well written in terms of simplicity to understand the tax code and the basics of tax strategy. It will open your mind to the possibilities of things you could talk about with somebody that helps you with your taxes, whether that's a CPA, which tend to be a little more expensive. If you're like a business owner with lots of employees and maybe multiple entities and multiple locations, maybe you want a CPA because they can help you with with your actual accounting work and preparing your financial statements. Maybe they've got a bookkeeper in office that you're working with that helps you make sure that everything's set up correctly to do your taxes. But again, they may not be a tax strategist. And so I keep reiterating the word strategy because it requires that we think differently. It requires that we ask good questions about what is possible in terms of legitimately saving on our taxes. No American is required to pay more than what is required of them. And we're only required to pay that which we are required to pay. And so if we don't know the deductions there, we're overpaying. If we don't file for the credit that's available to us, we overpay. And the good news is if you've missed some things, you can go back up to 3 years and amend prior tax returns to be able to get those dollars back. But after 3 years, you're dead in the water. So if you've missed something for quite a long time just because you were unaware or your CPA didn't know to ask about something that you're doing, such as a side business, and you've been missing all these deductions, you're dead. Like, you can't take advantage of that. Now, it's kind of unfair, unfortunately. The IRS can take up to 7 years to audit you. They can go back up to 7 years of your taxpayer life and review those things and come back and say, hey, we think you took a deduction that you don't qualify for. And we have to back that up with documentation. So burden of proof's on us. And that's why some people get scared. Get scared that I don't have the right documentation. I don't know how to document things. I don't know what I was supposed to document. Who's telling me these things? And so if this is you, then I'm telling you, you should document things. You need to have things in writing. You need to have a physical file or a digital file backing up things that you say are deductible. So as a quick example, if you take a home interest deduction, if you have a mortgage on your house, you will have received a 1099, a physical document, possibly a digital version of it, from your mortgage lender. They are required by law to give that to you, and it shows how much interest you paid. And you give that to your CPA or tax preparer, or you hold it in your own file if you're doing your own taxes, and you hold on to that for 7 years. Now, in today's world, we can digitize that and put it into a cloud so it's easy to get from anywhere in the world. But that's what I mean by documentation. You got to have some document backing up the deduction that you took. So to get back to my story from earlier, when I first was taking on the need of some support with my tax strategy and preparation, I found somebody who was not a CPA, but who was a strategist who had a designation known as an enrolled agent, EA. And I asked him about this. I said, what is this enrolled agent? Because I've heard I need to have a CPA. He said, well, basically what I just told you guys, he told me. And he said, an enrolled agent, unlike a CPA, is a specialist in tax strategy. To get an enrolled agent designation, you have to go through some training and you have to pass some tests to get licensed as an enrolled agent. And that means that you understand personal and business tax returns very, very well. And you have a simpler practice in that regard, so you can focus on doing strategy with your clients to help them maximize their deductions. And he said, we ought to be meeting 2 to 4 times a year to make sure we maximize your deductions, so we know what trajectory you're on with your business profits, and we don't over deposit money into the tax system on a quarterly basis, so that we don't give a free loan to the IRS, but instead keep the cash flow in our possession so you can maximize your returns. I said, that's brilliant. Let's do this. So an enrolled agent, I think, is what's better for most people. It's not to say, again, it's bad to have a CPA, but an enrolled agent is a great alternative because they specialize in tax. They don't specialize in accounting and all the public related stuff and the auditing, although they have to have accounting classes as well. These people specialize in tax planning and tax strategy. So consider that. If you're going to look for somebody to help you, if you're at the very basic level, it's free. You might go to H&R Block. You might go to your local library. Oftentimes your local community will have people who understand tax to help you file your taxes properly and correctly for free. You might go to, if you have a little bit of a side business, you might look for an enrolled agent. If you have a very sophisticated business and possibly considering going public yourself because you're massive, or at least you have the potential to be, maybe a CPA is the right place to be. And there are different price points at each of those different levels. So just know that, like, it's a good idea to become really familiar with tax. In fact, here's something you maybe have never heard. I think you should read your tax returns. For real, like, they're actually kind of cool because the tax return itself gives you all the clues you need about the types of things you would want to talk about with your strategist. I'm dead serious about that. How many of you have actually read your tax return? I'm sure most of you would say, you know what? No, I don't even want to look at that thing. I'm just glad it's done. But I encourage you guys, let it become something as a part of your role as a student of money. Read your tax return. Your tax return will inform you about the things that are possible to deduct, things where you can get credits. So it's really just 2 pages on your personal tax return that give the summary of your entire tax situation. And then there's various schedules that go with it as well. What's called Schedule A, which is your itemized deductions. Schedule C, which is small business activities that you do that may have deductibility. And then a variety of other things that give just more detail about your line items on the 2 pages of your 1040. Your business return as well has some important things on it. So I just recommend you get familiar with your own tax returns to help inform you about how to be better versed in how you talk to your enrolled agent or CPA or tax preparer in regard to your tax strategy. So back to some of the things I started with. Do you actually need a CPA? When does it make sense to get a CPA? CPAs are very helpful from an accounting perspective if you have a bigger business where you need audited financials or specifically prepared financials that you can't get from a bookkeeper or do yourself. They aren't necessarily tax strategists, although some are. Enrolled agents also are trained specifically in tax, but they are not necessarily trained as accountants, so they can't prepare audited financials. They can do bookkeeping for you if they're versed in that, and they may or may not be strategists. A tax preparer who works at H&R Block who may have some basic training, might not actually be an enrolled agent, or somebody who does free help at your local municipality, they probably aren't a tax strategist either. They're just trying to help you get the I's dotted and T's crossed. So you need an EA or a CPA when you are in need of strategy. Usually that happens when you're a small business owner or starting a small business and you have different factors than you're used to that are much more complicated so that you don't miss deductions. All right, we're going to wrap there, guys. I wish you a wonderful day. Thanks for listening. Please go like, subscribe, and share this with your friends. If you have the opportunity to do a review, I'd be very grateful. If you're liking this content, let me know. If you're not liking it, let me know what would you prefer to be hearing from me. But appreciate you guys. Love you. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for tuning in to the Wealth Acceleration Podcast. We hope the insights from today's episode help you streamline your finances and grow your wealth stress-free. For show notes from today's episode and more tips on creating a comprehensive wealth-building plan, visit moneymasterycoaching.com. Remember, financial freedom is attainable. Until next time, keep accelerating towards your goals. See you on the next episode.